Good afternoon to the scholars, organizers, and attendees of the 16th Annual Mongolian Studies Conference. My name is Dulamjav Amarsaikhany, and I'm a recent graduate of the Courtauld Institute of Arts Master's Program in Buddhist Art History and Conservation. I unfortunately could not attend the conference in person today, but I would like to thank the organizers for letting me present my paper in this video format. This paper was originally written as part of my master dissertation, which analyzed the relationship between the photographic medium and portrait painting tradition in the late 19th to early 20th century Mongolian art, which also specifically highlighted artists Baltogin Sharov, whose work we see here on the left side, Sonam Tsagaan in the middle, and Tsagaan to the right. This period of late 19th to early 20th century was a tumultuous and decisive moment in terms of political, administrative, and social organization for Mongolia. Whether in painting or photographs, the representation of historical figures of this period offers a window into the historical setting and testifies how visual traditions responded to changes in the larger sphere of political standing and the artist's own sphere of creativity and innovation. Today, I want to discuss and bring attention to a lesser-known body of work by Tsagaan, and particularly this triple portrait. The artist's use of photographs and the three identities of the three subjects, and specifically the identity of the monk, as seen on the left, is of particular interest to this paper. I compared Tsagaan renderings of his subjects with their respective source photographs, showing that the artist operated independently and carved his own unique aesthetic language. His innovative use of photographs to render portrait paintings also widens the discussion about the idea of realism in Mongolian art and strengthens the cause to question the art historical narrative of realism in early modern painting, in early modern Mongolian painting, being an influence of Western academic art practices. So Tsagaan well-known 5 paintings titled Jarlenem Dordessen, as seen here, 4 harmonious animals of Alte and camel herd. So these 5 paintings entered the Jamba Fine Arts Museum in 1969. These works have been shown and studied, they've been studied widely. However, 5 other paintings of similar format, technique, and material have been excluded from public view since they entered the Mongolian National Museum's collection in 1959. In 2009, a team of scholars, including Professor Bayurtur Amarsaikhany of the State University of Culture and Arts and Inktuya, registrar at the National Center for Cultural Heritage, brought these 5 works to scholarly and public attention. The seclusion of these 5 paintings, seen on the screen, was possibly due to their depiction of historic and religious subjects who were condemned during the revolutionary and later socialist periods. Tsagaan depiction of historic figures such as Genghis Khan, seen on the far right here, and Dembi Jensen, as well as deliberate Buddhist compositions such as King of Shambhala, Rigmindauq, would not have been allowed to be displayed during the socialist period in a museum setting. However, we do not know the full extent of why these works were not displayed for such a long period of time. Tsagaan life and identity is shrouded in mystery and lots of legends. Chadrin Jump, Tsagaan is his moniker, which means white. So Chadr is the supposed last name of the artist Tsagaan. So Chadrin Jump was born in 1870 in Sanloyang Amix, Uzungvangshu, so which is present day Pachang Ossum in the Urvanga Amix. He and his brother, Lata Jansang, took part in carving prints at the Bart Monastery of Arrahir, present-day Urhangar. And the monastery had two Barhangs, which is a printmaking studio that produced sutras, Buddhist sutras. So according to oral histories, Tsagaan was reprimanded for his scandalous depiction of a Bhava Chakra, a symbolic representation of samsara. And in this depiction, he painted the local ruling princes as being burned in hell. So for that, he was, according to the legends, he was presented as a painter to Dembi Jensen, also known as Jalama or Dambija. And it is also reported that he suffered in his that Master Dembi Jensen's hands, and it's also reported that he was either blinded or somehow his life was ended in the hands of Dembi Jensen. It is also known that he Tsagaan was active in the capital of Urgo for some time, but these facts also need some more clarification. So among the five rediscovered works, the triple portrait depicting Dembi Jensen, as seen on the screen, is a depiction of Dembi Jensen in the center, Sitsimbeas to his right, and an unidentified monk seated in a cave to the left. Tsagaan situated them in an outdoor imaginary landscape, typical in his other paintings. Of particular interest is actually how the artist used three different photographs to render his subjects' likenesses. Like many high-ranking monks and officials of Mongolia, and especially Western Mongolia, Dembi Jensen and Sitsimbeas were photographed numerous times. Thus, it seems that Tsagaan had access to several photographic portraits of his subjects to be able to use as resource images and incorporate it in his paintings. The visual technology, the medium of photography, was invented in Europe, and Mongolians first encountered it through Western travelers, scholars, during the late 19th century. Among early photographers active in Mongolia are geographer and botanist and ethnographer Potanin, whose expeditions are credited to have introduced photography first in Mongolia. Other early expeditions that left photographic records include American journalist George Kennan's trip, Potanin's 1888 expedition, accompanied by photographer Cherushin, whose work we can see here on the left, Pazniev's expeditions, which were also widely published and distributed in his travelogues. So with photography still being a novelty, people's attitudes towards sitting for photographic portraits have varied over time. For example, in his memoirs, a Russian merchant and photographer, Burdukov, who lived over 3 decades in Western Mongolia, described his experience of photographing the Jalfansotak Danvinvatsa around the year in 1912. He recalled that, Burdukov recalled that at first the Khotokt, Jalfansotak, was reluctant to be photographed, stating that it was not befitting his dignity, but finally agreed to be photographed on the condition that his bodyguards take away the negatives immediately after. But Burdukov managed to get hold of a few prints from the negatives, which were later used for postcards. Another contemporary account of calls a more favorable interaction with photography. So in 1912, the German-born adventurer and Hermann Constant, through an exchange of gifts with Duke Dendensureng, you can see Dendensureng here, and the photo in the center, in the photo on the right, positioned in the center. So he exchanged a few dozen photographs that depicted the Jalhan and Dendensur himself. So Dendensur actually liked photographs so much that he ordered more prints from Constant. So by the end of 19th century and towards the first decades of 20th century, religious heads, high-ranking officials, nobility, the ruling elite seem to have grown more familiar with being photographed in studio sessions and various formats. So, for example, in the General Authority of Archives of Mongolia, there are around 500 glass plate negative portraits of religious officials and nobility and residents of Urgo. There's evidence that several photographic studios existed in Urgo, which were operated by Russian and Chinese photographers. And so in Tsagaan triple portrait, he used source photographs portraying Dembi Jensen, which was published in Herman Constant's travelogue. Burduko, who also knew, the photographer Burduko, who also knew Dembi Jensen, noted that Dembi Jensen himself enjoyed being photographed, like many of his contemporaries. And Burdukov captured multiple images of Dembi Jensen. And Dembi Jensen, who was a mysterious and troubled figure, whose life and death was shrouded also in legends about his prophetic powers, clairvoyance, invulnerability to bullets. And it is said that he was of Kalmyk origin. He declared himself as the reincarnation of Amarsaikhany, the Dzungar ruler and leader of the rebellion against the Manchu Qing in 1750s. So in 1912, Dembi Jensen joined the movement to drive the Manchu Qing forces out of Khovd in Western Mongolia. And for his actions and during the rule of the theocratic government, he was bestowed as a reward, he was bestowed the title of Dakshing Noing Hotucht Namo Khan and was put in charge of 2,000 monks. Dembi Jensen became known for his extreme cruelty and sadistic behavior, which tarnished his and the theocratic government's reputation. And therefore, he was later assassinated by the revolutionary government in 1922. As for Sitsimbes, the person standing next to Dembi Jensen in the triple portrait, he is identified as the Jalsan Gomp Sidung, the eldest son of Nasambo Jargal, who became the ruling prince of Sitsun Zaskin Khoshu of Zakhtangamic, and therefore also known as Sitsimbes. He was the head of the Tsagaan children from 1911 to 1990 and served as the first Mongol ambam of Ulasta in Khovd after the last Manchu Qing ambam was driven out. And to portray Sitsimbes' likeness, Tsagaan could have used various photographs, as Sitsimbes was also very widely photographed, a person. As you can see in several photographs that were taken by Herman Constant. The third person in the portrait, the monk, who was unidentified before. This monk appears to be sitting in a cave and performing some sort of a ritual with his damaru and bell. And upon comparison with a photograph of a monk also published in Constant's book, which we see on the right, Constant Tsagaan might have used a photo of this monk who is a different person. So this the positioning of the hands and the sitting positions appear to be similar. And Constant reported that about the photograph. He reported that the monk the photograph of the monk was captured outside of Urgo in 1912 during a funeral of Bogdan's teacher. So it seems like Tsagaan rendering, the face is of a different person, but he used the photograph of a different monk for his composition. In the period of 1912 until his arrest in 1914, Denbi Jensen had several loyal monks as followers and confidants. So with the question of trying to identify who this person is, I've looked at other works by historians, and Na Suhbater clarified a few of the identities and the followers of Denbi Jensen. And based on the dates that these followers were associated, it is probable that the monk in the painting is either Rafsal Dava or Uchenbayer, also known as Lofson Sharaf of Tsagaan Amix Erden Zastak Gunsin Surungsho. Further investigation into the relationship between Denbi Jensen, Sitzenbes, and the monk is needed to provide insight as to the reason why this portrait was conceived in this way. Denbi Jensen was arrested in 1914 by Tsarist Russian soldiers and imprisoned. And in 1915, his possessions were confiscated and distributed across different ministries. And his idols, ritual implements were relegated to a local hure. Therefore, all of Tsagaan paintings under Denbi Jensen must have been completed in the period of 1912 to 1914, the years when Denbi Jensen received favors and until when he fell out of favor with the Bogdan's government. Tsagaan was well versed in Buddhist iconography, but was not necessarily bound by iconometric rules and compositional formats. For example, he used shading not only to depict the likeness of real-life figures, but also for deities such as Manjushri, which is seen here in the photograph, in the painting, King of Jamba. Unlike his contemporary Baltogin Sharov, who reserved such a degree of realism or shading technique for depiction of real-life people, and kept the deity Manjushri in his work in this idealized format. Tsagaan used the shading technique for both the mortal and the holy subjects. His choice of painting with ink and limited use of washes of few colors distinguished his work from that of Tanka painters of his time, which were usually densely covered in mineral pigment. He also held the ability to paint from direct observation, evidenced by his renderings of photographs, but also depictions of nature, animals, seen in works such as Jarleinammer or Dordessen. All of this combined with his rich imagination, featuring Buddhist symbols, mythical creatures, which are a blend of imaginary animals, enabled the artist to develop an original loose composition previously unseen in the visual culture of his time. Scholars such as Amarsaikhany assert that Tsagaan was not actively trying to break away from the Buddhist iconographic painting tradition, but he managed to develop his own symbolic representational compositions, imbued with decorative, folk motifs, drawing from his personal experiences as a printmaker. So looking at all the 10 works by Tsagaan, it is evident that he was adept at combining symbolic representation of Buddhist subjects with his practice of painting from real-life observations. Along with Sharov, artist Tsagaan is credited as one of the progenitors of Mongol Zurg tradition, a term for both traditional painting technique and style. stemming from Mongolian Buddhist art. Their works offer a window into Mongolian painting tradition that was active prior to 1921 People's Revolution, and how artists of the time were experimenting with new visual languages, techniques, and trends towards defining aesthetic sensibilities of Mongolia's early modern identity. Transitioning from a Manchu Qing vassal state to an independent state with a theocratic ruler, followed by the revolutionary period, the country and its people had to navigate uncertainties under the international influences of Tsarist Russia, Manchu Qing, later Soviet Russia, and Republican China. So, in such a turbulent political climate, artists also lived and created between the old tradition of religious subjects and patronage and tides of incoming secularization and modernization. Modernity, translated as Ashchinsak or Ashchungui, is defined as the period from defined as period from 1921, sometimes 1924, following the death of Buddhist ruler the Bogd and a period when the state and the government underwent secularization. So Mongolian art history and its historiography generally follows this categorization of modernization. Socialist era art historical narrative best exemplified by the works of Tsultem, for example, and in his discussions of development of modern painting in Mongolia, he described that at the end of the 20th century, Mongolia was a closed-off country left behind the highly developed European culture. He references the political and social changes that came with the People's Revolution of 1921 as a point in time faced with the challenges of developing new art and culture, and discusses Shadow's work and his use of photography in portraits. Another 20th century art historian, Sanem Tseren, describes the realist tradition of Mongolian visual art from the 1921, and he draws examples of Shadow, Sanem Tseren, and Tsagaan work. Popular discussions of Mongolian art also follow this example, and literature tends to oversimplify and deduce the introduction of realism in portrait painting as being an influence of Western art or Russian art academies. In his work on Shadov, art historian Batchelong also regarded Shadov's use of photographs to paint portraits as an earlier period of his career, and this particular technique as a progenitor of photorealism in Mongolian painting. However, he also credits Shadov as the first person to introduce the knowledge of Western three-dimensional representation into Mongolian visual art. But I argue that realism in portrait painting, or painterly techniques that emphasize the subject's physiognomy, was not exclusively a Western or Soviet era influence brought along after the revolutionary period. Artists like Shadov, Tsagaan, and their choice of portraying their subjects with varying degrees of realism predated the revolutionary periods of 1921, 1924, and the introduction of Western academic training. Attributing this shift only as a Western influence discounts the possibilities of a more earlier inter-Asian, specifically Qing, international style, or which encompasses the mix of exchange of Tibetan tanka, Qing court painting, and Mongolian visual idioms that local artists fused with the influx of the novel photographic medium. It's hard to establish whether the two artists were ever in contact, Jamba and Shadow, or witnessed each other's work, or to what degree there might have been exchange. But it is evident that photography propelled parallel experimentations in their work. While their source photographic images were captured by foreigners as a form of documentation rather than artistic work, the local artists utilized them in their own ways to appease the needs of their patrons and the social context. Tsagaan is a monumental figure in late 19th to early 20th Mongol tradition. The rediscovery of the 5 paintings has allowed us to redefine his legacy. Particularly, the triple portrait offered another example of an artist experimenting with realism or painterly techniques that highlighted the subject's likeness. This study, therefore, aimed to offer a closer look and clarify several aspects of this work and work towards dispelling some persisting aspects of the art historical narratives of the past. I would love to receive your comments and questions and critiques about my research. And I would like to thank everyone for their attention and apologize for not being able to be in Washington with you. And thank you very much.